Hello and welcome to part 9 of our video series on creating a Node, Express and Postgres based API. Today we're going to be working on creating our users table in Postgres. Now this happens outside of our application, and we actually run what's known as a data migration to go ahead and create our tables. That way the actual creation of your tables sits outside of your application, so that if you're running multiple instances of your application in a production environment, then it's not going to interfere, or you're not going to have race conditions where everything's trying to create an individual table on its own. Before we get started, if you want to follow along, there's a link in the video description for the GitHub repo that we're using, and we're on the part 9 start branch. So if you check that out, you'll have the code here in front of me and you'll be able to follow along exactly as I do. First things first, what we're going to need to do is add a new package, which is going to be for managing database migrations, which are used for creating tables, dropping tables, creating constraints, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So what we're going to do is we're just going to install an npm package called node pg migrate, which is fits really nicely with the pg package that we installed in the last video. So let's go ahead and do that. Npm install node pg migrate, and we're going to install version 5.10.0. So we'll just install that one there. There we go. It should appear within our dependencies now. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add a new command into our scripts section here, which is going to be a command that helps us out with our migrations. And this command is essentially just going to do node pg migrate. But what we're going to do is we're going to put an environment variable in front of this command, so that it definitely interacts with the database that we're expecting it to, because if you're anything like me, you might have multiple projects on the go at once, all with different database connections and things like that. So it's just nice to be able to make sure that your migrations are going to hit the exact database you're expecting them to hit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a database underscore URL equals Postgres :// which is a user, Postgres, which is a password, at localhost 5432 / Postgres, which is the database name. So this is just saying use this address for the database connection. This is a user, this is a password, and this is the database that we're going to be targeting. And that's what this command is going to be using to make sure that we target the right database. So once we've got that, one there, we're going to have a set of commands to run to create a database migration for us. And the way that we do that is to do npm run migrate create and then users-table. And what that should do is you'll notice a new folder appear in the root of our project, and within there you'll have something with a timestamp and then the actual name of the name of the migration that we created there. And what this will do is it'll give us a file that we can use to now add in our data that we want to add for our migrations. So typically a migration will have two things. It will have an up command and a down command. So an up command will, in our case, create the table and create any constraints that we want for that table. And the down command will delete any constraints that we've created and drop the table that we created. So there's always two parts to a migration, one to run it and one to reverse it in the event that it doesn't quite go as we're expecting it to. So as a general rule of thumb, make sure that we have something in both of those there. Now what you'll see is we have this PGM object here, which is essentially what we're going to be interacting with to create our table. And PGM comes with a whole bunch of commands that you can run, and I'll post a link in the video description to the package so that you can go and check it out as well and familiarize yourself with the commands that we're going to be running as well. But for this, what we're going to be doing is using pgm.create table, and then we'll pass it a name, so users. And then what we'll do is pass it an object, which is going to contain all of the properties that we want to create. So we're going to create an ID. And this ID here will just be the essentially a unique primary key ID for this particular table. So it will automatically increment from 0 all the way through to however many you need based on the records that get inserted into the table. And then we're going to have first name, and this one's going to have a type of varchar 100, and it's going to have not null true. So what this is going to do is create a first name field for us within our database. It's going to be able to take variable characters up to a maximum length of 100, and we're going to make sure that whenever any record is inserted into this particular column, that it can never be empty. So we'll add that one there, and what we're going to do is we're going to have add a new one, which is going to be last name, and it's going to be the same type, but we're going to remove the not null constraint because we want everyone to have a first name, but we don't necessarily need everybody to have a last name. Next, we're going to add an email address. We'll use the same constraint there. We'll add not null true. And then what we'll do is we'll have password, same again. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a created at field. Now, it's useful to know when records are inserted into the database. So we'll add a created at field. And what that's going to be is it's going to be a timestamp field. It's going to be not null true. And we're going to use a default operator for this particular field. And what this does is we don't need to explicitly provide created at as a value when we're inserting into this table, but we can if we want to. If we don't provide a value for it, then this default value will be provided, and we'll use pgm.func and then current timestamp. And what that'll do is that will put in the current timestamp whenever a record is inserted into this particular table. So that's what we're going to do here. So we've created our table, and what we'll do is on the down part, what we'll do is we'll do pgm.drop table users, and this will when we invoke down on our migrations, it will just drop that users table. Now that would suit most cases fine. However, typically you'd want an element of uniqueness when it comes to users, and one of the easiest things to add a unique constraint onto would be the email address. As you would expect, people are going to be logging in with an email address and password, so you can't really support multiple email addresses for different users. So what we'll do is we'll do pgm.add constraint, and then we'll put in the table name, and then we'll put in the name of the constraint, unique email, and then what we'll do, unique email. Simple as that. So all this will do is make sure that every time somebody is inserted into a table, it runs a check to make sure that email address doesn't already exist, and if it does, then it'll throw an error saying that there's a duplicate in there. Now, that's very good for obviously just manually inserting things into the database and things like that. We'll also have checks within our code base as well that make sure that when we try to create a new user, that one doesn't already exist. But as with most things, it's good to have multiple layers of protection for you, because once erroneous data gets into your database, it can be a bit of a nightmare to kind of unpick it all. So we'll add as many safety features as we can to our code base. Now, what we'll do as well is we'll, when we're doing a down, we'll do a drop constraint users unique email. Now what this will do is it'll just drop the constraint before it drops the table. Now it's a good idea to make sure that you tear things down in the opposite way that you stand them up. So first we create a users table, then we add a constraint. Next we'll, when we're doing a down, we drop the constraint first and then drop the tables. And it'll be even more important when we're adding relationships and things like that in the future between tables, because those need to be torn down in a certain order as well. But that should be pretty much all we need to do for our migration. And all that's left for us to do now is to actually run these migrations. And the way that you do that is you do npm run migrate up. And what we've got there is we've got our table that's created, and we've got our altering of the table to add a constraint, and all of the migrations are complete. Now, it's worth noting at this point that you're expecting your database service to actually be up and running. If you get any errors at this point, just do a docker compose ps just to make sure that your database is up and running. And if it's not for any reason, then you just do a docker compose up-d, and it'll just make sure that your database is up and running. Now, in the event that you need to down any of your database migrations, you'd simply just run npm run migrate down, and what that'll do is it will alter the table and drop the constraint, and then it'll drop the users table as well. But for what we want, we actually want them to be there, so we'll just add them back in like that. Now, if you want to check this out, if you followed along with my previous videos, you should have a database client like dbeaver or something like that set up for you. Oops. So you can interact with your database. So we can find our local Postgres database, and what we can do is we can take a look at the tables here, and you'll notice that you've got two tables. You've got a PG migrations, which is what is used just to track and make sure that migrations have or haven't been run. And then what we've also got is our users table here, and what you can see is we've got our ID, our first name, last name, email, password, and created app. And that will give you all of the fields that we need for our table. So now that we've done that, what we'll look at doing in the next video is we will look at adding our first route, which will be to create a new user. So that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video.